well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is great to have you with us today. And on today's program, it's all you. Your emails, cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. That is the email address. We've been doing this, I think last Friday was the first Friday that we started doing this, but I like it. I like the opportunity to get to hear from you and your comments, your questions about what's been going on in the world of the Second Amendment over the last week or so. Obviously, we're going to be talking quite a bit about Second Amendment sanctuaries on today's program. And it's fascinating. We're now up to 91 localities in Virginia, the vast majority of which, by the way, are counties. There are some cities, but most of these are going to be counties that have adopted these Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. We've got another wave coming next week, and then things will start to die down. But I think that when all is said and done, we are going to see well over 80% of the counties in Virginia, probably much closer to 90% of the counties in Virginia that have signed on to these Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. And the media is now starting to pay attention to this. I want to thank Glenn Beck for having me on his radio program today, talking about what's going on in Virginia. Also, Steve Cortez in Chicago. I'm going to be talking with him Friday evening if you get a chance to tune in. Derek Hunter up in Maryland I've been talking with about the Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. So the word is starting to get out about what is happening in Virginia. And of course, Democrats are freaking out about what is happening in Virginia because they really anticipated that, gun owners were just going to roll over and acquiesce to these gun control laws. And that is not happening. And I don't expect that to happen in Virginia either. Let's get to some emails here, shall we? And I'm just going to go in reverse chronological order. So we'll get the newest ones first, just because it's easier for me to do that. But we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. Greg, my llama-owning friend in North Carolina, saying, you mentioned that there's been no one in charge of all of these county meetings where they're taking up county sanctuary or sanctuary county city statutes. It reminds me of the issues in Hong Kong, where citizens have gotten riled up and are trying to make the government officials listen. Just another viewpoint. Thanks for all that you do, says Greg. I think that that's actually a pretty good comparison, Greg, because it's not that there has been no organization. There has been. The Virginia Citizens Defense League, I think, has been very good about informing folks of when meetings are taking place. They've been helpful when supervisors are looking at language for Second Amendment resolutions. But this is not being directed by the Virginia Citizens Defense League. This is not being directed by the NRA or Second Amendment Foundation or any other gun group out there. This is a true grassroots movement, and the reason that you know that that's the case is because when you show up to these county supervisors meetings and you see the hundreds or in some cases thousands of individuals who are there in attendance, most of them are not VCDL members. Some of them may be NRA members, but a lot of these folks are not. A lot of these folks, this is their first foray into Second Amendment activism. Now, they may have shown up and voted in November, but this is the first time that they've ever really taken this type of step to show up on a rainy Thursday evening and stand outside in the cold and the rain for hours on end because they can't fit inside the building where the Board of Supervisors are meeting to vote on one of these resolutions. That doesn't happen unless there is real grassroots energy. Nobody's being paid to show up for these meetings. They're there, in many cases, taking time off of work, rearranging their schedules, maybe having to provide for babysitters for their kids. But they're doing it because they feel like it's worth it and because they want their voices heard. Let's see. This is alias Smith and Brame. Says, I've been admiring the people of Virginia for their stance on the Second Amendment. I think instead of calling their counties Second Amendment sanctuaries, And they might want to call them Second Amendment enforcement zones. Law enforcement officers and county officials are simply upholding their oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States from being undermined by these unconstitutional proposals. And alias Smith and Brame says, love your show. Keep up the good work. Thank you for that, sir. I appreciate it. And, I like that idea. I think that the reason why we call them Second Amendment sanctuaries, well, first of all, now it's actually sort of tradition, right? Because in Illinois, where this movement really started, that's what they called them. And the comparison is to immigration sanctuary cities, right? And it's not a perfect comparison, as gun control advocates will remind us, because they say, well, that's the federal law, and states don't have to enforce the federal law, and that's true. However, even in states like Virginia, that are so-called Dillon Rule states, where the state legislature supposedly, has the floor and decides what laws are going to be on the books and what laws are going to be enforced. Even in a state like Virginia that has that rule in place, you still have discretion on the part of law enforcement, be it the officer on the street, or the county sheriff or the local prosecutor, to decide what cases are going to be priorities and even what categories of crimes are going to be priorities. It's interesting, in Portsmouth County earlier this year in Virginia, or Portsmouth, Virginia, the Commonwealth's attorney, Sandra Morales, announced that she would no longer be accepting any misdemeanor marijuana cases. Her office would simply not prosecute them. How is that any different than a Commonwealth's attorney saying, you know what, I'm not going to accept any cases involving a violation of the quote unquote universal background check law, or, magazine bans or things of that nature. There's absolutely no difference. Now, when Sandra Morales made her announcement in Portsmouth, Virginia earlier this year, Governor Northam, he didn't object. He didn't say that there would be consequences if she didn't enforce state law. It's not about enforcing state law. It's about enforcing gun control laws for the Democrats. That's the difference. And they are fine with ignoring whatever laws they want to ignore, right? It's all about resist when they're not in power. But when they do gain control, then it's about compliance. It's not about resistance. Jeffrey, writing in, says in January, the Democrats of Virginia are going to implement intolerable acts. The governor, or should I say General Gates, said there will be consequences to disobeying unconstitutional laws that he's saying are constitutional. Evidently, Jeffrey says, he doesn't know what our forefathers put in our Constitution. I'm personally sick of our so-called justice system giving criminals a slap on the wrist and punishing law-abiding citizens in the name of public safety. We are on the green, says Jeffrey. Who is going to fire the new shot that's heard around the world? The great state of Virginia has been in the Revolutionary War and Civil War. Is the great state of Virginia going to be the state that starts the next one? I don't live in Virginia, says Jeff, but if called, I will fight with my brother in Virginia. Jeff, I don't think we're there yet, honestly. In fact, I don't think we are all that close to being there. And I hope we don't get there, honestly. I don't want to see civil disorder in the state that I live. I don't want to see my constitutional rights violated either. And yes, there are plenty of problems in the criminal justice system. We highlight them every day on this program, including that story out of Illinois yesterday that's gotten a lot of attention about that woman who was being beaten by her ex, and she used her legally owned firearm to defend herself, but she ended up getting charged for having a firearm without her concealed carry license, and her bond was a lot higher than the guy who was abusing her. I mean, there are those stories each and every day. But you know what? We also have to put our trust at some point in the judicial system. I'm not like Elizabeth Warren. I'm not interested in tearing everything down and then trying to build on the ashes. That's not what I'm about. I'm about protecting and preserving the rights that we have. And that means that using the institutions that we have to try to protect and secure those rights. Thankfully, we live in a nation where our forefathers set up a system of checks and balances. And so when our lawmakers pass unconstitutional laws, we do have recourse. We can challenge those laws in court. we can rely on the discretion given to local law enforcement to hopefully negate some of the worst abuses of these laws. And, one other thing as well, Jeff, you look at the thousands of people that have shown up for some of these county meetings. I had this thought occurred to me the other night when I was looking at video from Rockingham County, where there are about 3,000 people crowded inside the high school gym and then about another 3,000 outside who could not fit in the building. And this is about the same time that Governor Northam said, there are going to be consequences if these laws aren't enforced. I just have a really hard time seeing those individuals who showed up there at that meeting in support of the Second Amendment. I have a really hard time imagining those same folks convicting their neighbor or the owner of the local hardware store or the checkout clerk at the grocery store where they shop on a weekly basis. In my case, it's about every 2 days, milk and bread. I have a hard time seeing those people, imagining those people convicting their friends and their neighbors and the people in their community of the unconstitutional gun control laws that they've been fighting against. So Governor Northam, I think one of the proposals that they're kind of banding about right now is, well, if these Commonwealth attorneys don't end up prosecuting these cases, well, maybe the Attorney General's office is going to have to take some of these cases. Well, you're still going to be, even if that were to happen, which would be fairly unprecedented, even if that were to happen, you're still going to be charging these people in the county where they live. So what happens when their peers, a jury of their peers, votes not to convict and votes to acquit these individuals? Because I can see that happening a lot easier than I can see a large number of convictions coming out of these Second Amendment sanctuary counties, even if the Attorney General's office ends up being the one to try to prosecute some of these cases. Bruce writing in with another Hong Kong analogy. He says, I have seen this video from Hong Kong, and in it, one of the masked activists is in a crowd carrying a sign saying, "We need the Second Amendment." I have seen that as well, Bruce, and they do. We don't like to talk about it often, but the Second Amendment, when we talk about the Second Amendment protecting all of the other rights, this is what we're talking about. That if, God forbid, it ever gets to that point where the government is using force against individuals who in Hong Kong are speaking out for what little shred of their individual liberty remains, that is tyranny. When you see the police state crack down on individuals who are using their voice to defend themselves, that's why we know that sometimes you're going to need more than your voice. Now, again, I don't believe that we live in a tyranny. I don't believe that Ralph Northam is king. I believe that we have the ability in Virginia 2 years from now to replace at least some of these anti-gun lawmakers who were elected this past November with lawmakers who actually understand that the Second Amendment is a real right and that it cannot be infringed on without violating the rights of American citizens. So I don't believe that all is lost in Virginia, because I believe that we are just now seeing a wake-up call from a lot of Virginia gun owners. David, writing in, says, first off, Cam, how is your wife? As a cancer survivor myself, I am concerned about her status. And thank you for thinking of her, David. She's doing okay right now. I don't talk much about this on Bearing Arms Cam and Company. I talked about it a little bit when I had the longer show on NRA TV, but a little more than 3 years ago, my wife, Miss E, was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer. She had what's called a lobectomy, and a lobe of her lung was removed where the tumor was. She went through about 8 months of chemotherapy. She had about 8 months where she was clear, and then a scan revealed that she had tumors growing in both of her lungs. So she's been through basically all of the standard courses of treatment. She was in a clinical trial starting back in the summer, but around September, she actually had to end that trial because of the side effects that she was facing. So honestly, David, since then, she's not been on any treatment whatsoever. She has an appointment with a doctor next week. Hopefully she's going to be back on some form of treatment, but right now she's not. She feels good. That's the good news. And she's enjoying the holiday season. She's busily knitting and crocheting corny goat critters, her little stuffed animals that she puts up on her Etsy page. If you're interested, look for all one word, corny goat crafts on Etsy. And we're trying to make every day count. That's the key, because we really, and I hate to get all philosophical. Well, I don't hate to. I kind of like getting all philosophical, but you might not want to hear it. But whether you're perfectly healthy or whether you have stage 4 metastatic lung cancer, we don't know how long we're here. And so my goal is to make her every day the best day that it can be. And for her, and for us as a couple, and for us as a family, my goal is to make every day that we have with her count. Because, we don't know how long we're here, and we don't know how long we have. And until you're sort of faced with that moment of, okay, here's what's going on with your body, and we don't know if we can fix it, you might not even think about this, right? It's easy to take these days for granted. But when you've been told that you have an illness, or someone you love has an illness that we don't know that can be treated and could lead to their passing, it does tend to focus you a little bit on what's really important. And David, I hope that you, sir, are in your fight, and I hope that you are doing well. Please let me know. David also wanted to know what exactly, or just exactly what purpose does the serial number on a firearm accomplish? He says, I know the manufacturers use the number for warranty and record keeping, but I have several firearms that will not trace to me. In fact, from my reading, it looks like the vast majority of traces fail to find the current legal owner. Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm not an expert on why we have serialized firearms. I think part of it is for record keeping for the manufacturers, for retailers. They can keep track of their inventory. And then, of course, when you're tracing a gun, or the ATF's tracing a gun, they can trace that at least back to the original point of sale, right? But it does not amount to a gun registry automatically. However, what we're seeing now in this push to ban so-called ghost guns, or guns that individuals make, which, by the way, you're legally allowed to do in this country, then I think it is about establishing a registry. I think it's about trying to keep track of who owns what firearms. Donald writing in from Utah. He says, as a lurker to bearing arms, I am very much as a lurker. Well, you're not a lurker anymore. You wrote in. So you no longer have lurker status, Don. Don says, I'm very much offended by the Virginia Democrats' threat to use part of the U.S. standing army against supporters of our constitutional republic. He says, although commanders are unlikely to obey unconstitutional orders, the National Guard is now part of the standing army because it's no longer a militia as defined by the U.S. Constitution, limited to the 3 duties of Article 1, Section 8, paragraphs 15 and 16, to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. On the other hand, Don says, the constitutional sheriffs are the highest elected by the people law enforcement officers in the land, who have every legal right to command their respective militias in performing their duties to support and defend the U.S. Constitution. If Governor Northam, says Don, is dumb enough to declare war against our Constitution, he will find himself badly outnumbered by patriots. I think that is correct, Don. And I have to say, listen, first of all, Governor Northam was not the one to actually talk about sending out the National Guard. We could talk about what Governor Northam has said, which is bad enough. But it was actually Congressman Donald McEachin, who represents Virginia's 4th Congressional District, who said, well, if these counties don't follow the law, then the governor should send out the National Guard. And I think it shows, again, the hysteria frankly, on the part of gun control advocates who did not expect that that gun owners would have learned a thing or two over the past few years. Ever since the election of Donald Trump, we've seen the left resist as much as they can. Why would we not take a page from that playbook, frankly? I do suspect that if the governor was dumb enough to try to call out the National Guard, and I don't think that's going to happen, but if he was dumb enough to call out the National Guard, I think that would trigger another crisis entirely, because again, the National Guard of Virginia is made up of Virginians, and they don't want to enforce these unconstitutional gun laws any more than the sheriffs or local law enforcement do. So I don't think that would actually solve anything for the governor. I think it would actually create a whole other problem. All right, let's see. Let's get to a few more emails as well here. Let's see. This is from Zigzag Android in Virginia, who says the major miscalculation that the gun control lobby made in their plans for Virginia is you. He said the big money gun control lobby and their politicians knew there would be pushback in Virginia against the proposed laws, but they were expecting to wage the fight against the evil NRA who'd be leading the opposition. They planned for this. They focus grouped their rhetoric for this. This was supposed to be about standing up to the NRA and the gun lobby, who are blocking their so-called common sense gun safety reforms that the people of Virginia are ostensibly demanding. He says, look around. He says, where is the NRA? Other than releasing a brief statement cheering you, they're staying out of it. I only see you, the regular citizen, and the Virginia Citizens Defense League. VCDL are not big shot lobbyists who have astroturfed a choreographed campaign. They're facilitators, helping all of you coordinate with one another. This movement was created by you, and it's led by you. And I do agree with that, by the way. And I've spoken about this before, and I don't mean any disrespect to Phil Van Cleve of the VCDL, who's been a guest on this program. I'm going to be speaking at VCDL's Lobby Day on January 20th of 2020 at the state capitol in Richmond. And I hope that we see, listen, if everybody who has gone to a Board of Supervisors meeting in Virginia can make it to the Lobby Day at the Capitol, we will have, close to 100,000 Virginians. It'll be amazing. If 1 in 2 of those folks who have shown up at the Board of Supervisors meeting can get to the state capitol, it'll be a crowd of 50,000. And that will send a message. That'll send a huge message. But this campaign, as I said, is not being directed by Philip Van Cleve. He may be, and the VCDL may be helping folks find out where these meetings are taking place. They may be, again, helping with some of the language of the resolutions. But Philip Van Cleve and the VCDL cannot compel anybody to go to a Board of Supervisors meeting. And you're right. They will try to portray this as the gun lobby. They've already done it. They've already tried to say that, well, this is just VCDL directed and it's Philip Van Cleve and his, merry band of misfits out there. Again, with all due respect to Philip Van Cleve, there is no leader of the Second Amendment sanctuary movement. There is no leader. Let me say that again. No one is directing this fight because it's happening neighbor to neighbor. It's happening county by county. And if it were top directed, if this were, coming to Philip Van Cleve, hey, gun owners got to go out there, we wouldn't see the turnout that we're seeing, frankly. So I'm right there with you here. Zigzag says, the gun control lobby showed up prepared to debate the wrong opponent. But even after they realize what's happening, nothing these big lobbyists and their gaslighting, narcissistic politicians can say will stop you. When a state delegate threatens you with the National Guard for potential non-compliance of unjust laws that haven't even been passed yet, you know they've lost all control of the narrative. Imagine that scene, soldiers armed with rifles disarming citizens. I'm wagering that they are petrified of the photo opportunity that Lobby Day is going to provide with so many of you there peacefully assembling. The world would not have turned on the Hong Kong government had their citizens not showed up to protest. You have the luxury in America of not being gassed and shot for doing so. Don't waste that. He says, you have captured the hearts of so many around the country. You have set an example for all to follow. There is still much work to be done. The sea will soon turn rough, but the winds are at your sails, and you are traveling with the current. But more importantly, your cause is righteous. I am humbled and honored to have you as my neighbors. Well, listen, I hope that we see you in Richmond at Gun Owners Lobby Day on the 20th of January. Zigzag Android, come up and see me, shake my hand, say hi. And anybody else who's out there as well, I would love to see you there again on January 20th, 2020 at the Virginia State Capitol. All right, finally, we've got an email from Bob in Northern Virginia who says, I listened to your broadcast where you read the email from Dan about the Board of Supervisors meeting and the vote, and I agree with most of what was said. This was in Prince William County, Northern Virginia. Bob says, I was there for 7 hours. Wow. Until the vote, and there was about 2 hours of citizen time, with speakers limited to 2 minutes each. Fabulous turnout for sure. He says, however, there seems to be a misunderstanding about what they actually voted for in both Prince William County and other counties as well. The vote, says Bob, was not for a Second Amendment sanctuary county. It was to designate Prince William County as a constitutional county. The term sanctuary was taken out of the previously circulated draft proposal, as was any language to the effect that they would not allow county resources to be used in the prosecution of any new laws. The resolution basically states that they support the Constitution. Bob says even with that, 2 supervisors voted against supporting the Constitution, a direct repudiation of their oath of office. Bob says, however small a victory in Prince William County, this was a significant event and vote. And thank you for your excellent work. And Bob, thank you, sir, for writing in with that correction. You're right. The language, again, this is evidence of the fact that this is not being directed by any one person or group, because the language changes from county to county. So you've had a couple of places that have actually put ordinances on the books, not resolutions, ordinances saying we will not spend any county funds on enforcing unconstitutional gun control laws. You've had a lot of counties that have passed resolutions expressing their desire to not spend any public funds enforcing unconstitutional gun control laws. And then, as you say, you've got that language that's a little bit watered down. It says, we just support the Constitution. Here's my take on this, Bob. And I've been doing a little bit of research here. I know a lot of these county officials, first of all, a lot of these county officials are concerned about the reaction from the state legislature in Virginia. I talked with one individual who works in county government. I'm not even going to say what county it was. He's not a Board of Supervisors member, but he's just he's a fairly high-level employee of a county that has passed a Second Amendment sanctuary resolution. And when I was talking to him at this meeting, I could tell that he was kind of on the fence about it. And I said, so what are your concerns? He said, look, I'm a Second Amendment supporter. He said, that's not my concern. He said, my concern is that there are a lot of bullies in Richmond, and I'm concerned about them taking punitive action against counties that have passed these resolutions in terms of funding, in terms of money that, that we rely on from the state, tax dollars that, we spend and we send to Richmond, and then it comes back to us. I'm worried about that. And I think it's a valid concern. I do. At the same time, however, I think it's important for every county supervisor, county sheriff, and Commonwealth's attorney in Virginia to understand what's happening here with the Second Amendment sanctuary movement is no different than what progressives have been doing or the left has been doing in the state of Virginia when it comes to enforcing laws that they don't like. The Commonwealth's attorney in Portsmouth, Virginia, Sandra Morales, earlier this year said that she would no longer prosecute any misdemeanor marijuana arrests. Any of those charges that was brought to her office, she was just going to dismiss them outright. Okay. Frankly, by the way, I'm fine with that. I'm in favor of decriminalizing and legalizing cannabis anyway. So I'm okay with that. But Governor Northam shouldn't be okay with that. He should be telling Sandra Morales, hey, there are going to be consequences if you don't enforce state law. Attorney General Mark Herring shouldn't be okay with that. He should be telling Sandra Morales, hey, you know what? If you don't enforce these laws, we're going to send attorneys from the AG's office in to take these cases. Because that's what they're saying when it comes to the Second Amendment. But when it comes to these drug laws in Virginia, they're fine with it because they don't like the laws either. So again, I go back to what I said at the beginning of this program. This is not about public safety. This is not about reducing violent crime. This is not about reducing the suicide rate in Virginia. This is not about keeping people safe. It's about going after gun owners. It's about going after the Second Amendment. It's about restricting and infringing the right to keep and bear arms. It's about turning that right into a privilege. And the glaring double standard that exists on the part of people like Governor Ralph Northam and Attorney General Mark Herring is a perfect demonstration of that. All right, listen, I want to thank each and every one of you for writing in. I enjoyed this program. I always do. And we're going to do this again next Friday. So you don't have to send your email right away, but feel free to drop me a note, cam.edwards@bearingarms.com, and we will get to more of your questions and your comments if the National Guard hasn't rounded me up by this time next Friday anyway. Thanks again for being a part of the program today. Don't forget you can subscribe to the program as a podcast at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, townhall.com's podcast page. You can also become a VIP member of Bearing Arms, get exclusive content and commentary, analysis, and more. You can do that at bearingarms.com. Have a great weekend. We will see you here soon with another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company.